and Joanne Pino from our office, who are going to be helping us with this chat. As those of you who were here before know, we've launched this chat because we really recognize the very unusual and unbelievably stressful challenges facing parents of children with autism and other disabilities during this pandemic. We've limited it to half an hour in response to how busy many parents are with their children at home, so we have a lot to cover. We know there on the bottom of the screen there is a chat button, and if you can use that chat button to submit your questions, Lily will read them at the end. I'm going to talk for the first 15 minutes, and then we're going to leave the second half for questions. We will do our best to get to your questions, but we know in this short amount of time we will likely not be able to answer everybody's questions. So please remember to use our helpline. If there's questions that you have that haven't been answered, please contact our helpline or email our helpline. We will be recording this, but the chat information will not be made public. Lily, is there anything I forgot to cover in terms of logistics?
That's it. Thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. So, Joanne, can you change the slide, please? We are now in the 4th week of shelter in place, and special education services are hopefully increasingly rolling out for kids with autism and other disabilities. There was a lot of confusion initially by the federal government and the state government about whether or not districts had to be trying to meet the special ed needs of children with autism and other disabilities. It's now very clear that schools have to provide special ed services remotely to all students who have disabilities. I'm going to go over some of the highlights very quickly about what the state has told districts they should be doing to provide these legally required services. I have to just forewarn you, the cautions that they give as you hear things, that it's going to be frustrating to many of you to learn what districts should be doing, because we realize that this is not rolled out evenly in many districts. But we know that it's important for you to know what schools should be doing so that you, as always, knowing your children as experts about your kids' needs, can advocate effectively. And we know that particularly meeting the complex communication and behavioral, social, sensory, and academic needs of children with autism is going to be, in many cases, particularly challenging for districts to figure out in this emergency situation, when none of this has ever been done before. How do we provide these services as well as possible remotely? At the same time as you all continue to advocate so effectively, it's important to remember, as we all know, that the states and districts really are working hard to figure out how do you do this? How do you provide services over the phone or remotely over the internet in a way that will actually engage children effectively? And then a lot of teachers have their own kids at home, so they have less capacity, or they're dealing with illness in their family. And you as parents are dealing with this challenges of this abrupt stop of services, and you're expected to facilitate your child's learning. This is new educationally, it's new legally, it's frustrating as all of us figure this out. None of us have all the answers. We're learning the answers, we're learning the questions and the answers as we go. And we need your involvement and your parent voice, so we figured out the answers as quickly as possible, because it's your kids who are in the balance. Next slide, please, Joanne. So what does this look like? What are schools expected to do while schools are closed? It's now very clear from the state that all districts, as of 2 weeks ago, should be providing services, both types of services that are listed here. The resources and supports that were in many districts rolled out first, different kind of packets from teachers or online assignments or access to public television. Those kinds of resources and supports should be available for all kids as it's necessary to meet their needs, and they should be accommodated so that your kids can access those services. In addition, districts should now, as of 2 weeks ago, they should be rolling out the specialized instruction and services that they're able to do remotely in a way that reflects the constraints of schools being closed and the safety needs of teachers and kids. Those services could be full class or small group instruction, one-to-one services, parent consultation, and related services remotely. A lot of the challenges legally about providing those services remotely have been handled. So all of those related services are able to be provided remotely at this time. So these instructions and services can be provided remotely through the internet, on the phone, virtually. It's going to depend on the child and the resources available, how those services can be provided now. I think the main thing is that this is going to require a lot of close collaboration with families and hearing from families about what your priority concerns are to meet your child's autism-related needs. Next slide, please, Joanne. I have to learn how to do these slides independently. That's my goal for the next meeting. So the other important points in terms of special ed services are the state's been very clear that there should be direct and regular and ongoing communication between the school and the family. And the frequency is going to be based on the needs of the child. And we know that for a lot of kids with autism, they may need a higher degree of frequency, and they might need more frequent contact with different specialists depending on what's going on in a certain period of time. If there's an escalate, and this may be going on for many more months, we really don't know at this point. But if there's, spikes in behavioral issues or in anxiety issues, there may be a point where it requires more frequent communication. The services being provided now while schools are closed are addressing the current IEP goals and services. And it's also important to underscore that for families whose primary language is not English, that school districts should be providing the resources and the services in the family's primary language. Next slide, please. So one of the things that became clear from the state as of 2 weeks ago, they issued new guidance that said every district for every child with autism or other disabilities should be developing a remote learning plan. And I'm just going to go over very briefly what's required to be in the remote learning plans. Since this was only 2 weeks ago, again, this is being rolled out. Some districts were doing this already before the states directed them to. Others are still in the process of doing this. The state was really clear about two things. Number one, districts should not delay provision of services before they develop the actual written plan. And second, number two, they said that the district should document the services that are being provided now, but it's expected that if this goes on substantially longer, that the district will increase its capacity to provide more robust services over time if that's what's needed for kids. But the bottom line is these services are going to be implemented very differently than how they were implemented from the IEP previously, obviously when the school was open. So very briefly, this plan, there are some templates from the state that we've included in the slides at the end. The districts don't have to use this template, but they should provide this information in whatever form they're going to give it to families in writing. So families are supposed to know what the schedule is for the ongoing communication. I had one district tell me that they realized to be effective, they should schedule, one day maybe for the speech therapist to be working with the family, a different day for the special ed teacher, a different day for the BCBA, to make it clear so the child has some predictability and the family has some predictability. For the family to know which teachers and related service providers are going to be involved, what the schedule is, the length of time. Maybe the plan would say that the child will have Monday and Wednesday Zoom speech therapy in a small group from 10 to 10:30. The types of assignments, including any accommodations that might be needed, how the teachers are going to collaborate, the start date, and then if services are changed or increased, then that date's supposed to be notified to the parents in writing as well. This is not an IEP, so there's no consent required. It's implementing to the extent that districts can do this remotely, the services that are in the IEP. And so a lot of families have asked, well, can we disagree with what's in there? It's not like an IEP where you have this formal due process of procedures that are in place, But what's really important is that it's clear that districts have to hear from you. If you feel that the plan is inadequate, the district has to hear from you about which priority needs of your child during this crisis are unmet, and then to work together collaboratively to develop some creative solutions to better meet your child's needs. Again, if you're somebody who's not yet received a remote learning plan or you're having difficulty with this, please feel free to call or contact our helpline. And we will be developing more tools over time to hopefully make this easier for families to navigate. Next slide, please. So I'm going to very briefly talk about some of the areas of need that we know are very important for students with autism. Clearly, we know communication needs are a factor for many, many children. So very briefly, there's a lot of resources about each of these types of communication needs at the end. We know that, very significant number of children with autism are nonverbal and have limited speech and require augmentative alternative communication devices, whether that be high-tech or more a low-tech pictorial system like PECS. We know that speech therapists have been working very hard to figure out how to address the AAC needs of children with autism and other disabilities remotely. There are some resources at the end for families about AAC services remotely. Again, this is all a work in process, but if this is an important area of need for your child, then this is obviously something that you'd want to be focusing on with your school district. Another thing in the chat option is if there's areas that you in the future would like to have us go into in more depth or bring in experts to talk about, like AAC, please let us know, because we can only go touch things very briefly here. As we mentioned, remote telespeech therapy is now, it's possible for school districts to provide that therapy in terms of the legal issues about doing it through teletherapy. We also know that the social communication needs of a lot of children with autism are very pivotal. So for some kids, if they had a remote social skills group, then, and it's really considered important for that social skills group to continue, that might be a service that would be important to focus on in terms of any remote service plan. Again, the district is going to need to hear from you about what's most pressing for your child. You may realize that you need the staff to help develop a social story because your child is so confused about why they can't go outside, or they need a social story to help them to participate more effectively in a Zoom classroom or a Zoom therapy session. So it's by hearing from you that districts can more effectively develop the way to engage students effectively. Next slide, please. The behavioral needs are acute for many children with autism. Again, this is an area we could go in more depth in another session, but ABA services can be provided remotely, both from the school. Everybody, please keep your mute button on. Or Lily, I think we need you to, thank you. Whether that's ABA services that are being provided in terms of consultation with the family or direct ABA with the child. Again, for some kids, it's going to be really hard to engage remotely if families do have access to a device and to the internet. I know practitioners are thinking and working really hard to figure out how to do this effectively. If the district's offering it and it's not working, again, that's where there has to be really close communication. And ABA services can also be provided through private insurance and through Mass Health. Most of the services being provided through insurance are remote. There are some providers who are still consistent with the safety needs of COVID going on site into homes to provide services. We have resources about these ABA services at the end too. You can call our helpline or the Autism Insurance Resource Center, who's done great advocacy around ABA services. Next slide. I have to talk faster to leave time for questions. There's obviously a lot of other major important areas of need for students with autism that we're not going to be able to go into in depth. So please let us know through the chat if there's particular areas of concern that you would like to hear more about in the future. We've bolded anxiety because we're hearing from many parents who have kids on the spectrum about the fact that their kids are just becoming so skyrocketing high in terms of their levels of anxiety because of the abrupt change in routine and the structure and having to be sheltered in place and difficulty understanding it. We know for some children with autism, they're not anxious to that extent because they don't have a need to be interacting socially and they have less sensory challenges. But we do know that anxiety is a huge issue for many, many children. And as you all experience daily, if the children are experiencing such increased anxiety, it's going to be very difficult to focus on any other of the learning of academic and functional skills. So next week, Dr. Nancy Rusa and Dr. Stephanie Monahan from NESCA are going to be speaking specifically about how to address anxiety during the COVID crisis, because we know that's such a huge area of need. But again, we want your feedback on other areas. In the next slide, we just want to briefly show you, and you'll have access to all the slides. This is an example of something that was developed by a public school district. I believe it was Needham. And it's an example of how they developed a tool to help kids who are feeling very frustrated with trying to engage remotely and how to deal with their anxiety around this whole process. Again, this is just a good model. I think it's helping people to think about what the creative options are and how districts and parents partner together can begin to roll out the services and the tools that are going to help make remote instruction of special ed services more effective. Next slide, please. We get a lot of questions about team meetings. IEP meetings can and should be happening now. They can be happening by video like this or by phone. Schools should be collaborating with parents to help schedule meetings. We know that school districts in many instances are not going to be able to hold IEP meetings consistent with all the required timelines. We know that there may be in some instances that they'll have to ask parents permission not to have all the required IEP team members there. If a parent chooses that they don't want to participate virtually and they want to wait until school's open, that's the parent's choice. But the state is expecting districts to be conducting IEP meetings. Districts may need to prioritize the IEP meetings that are most urgent for kids or for kids who will be facing some kind of transition when schools open. But again, if you feel that there's a need for your team to meet and to meet sooner than later, then you should definitely be requesting that of your school district. If you're having trouble getting that to happen, please contact our helpline and let us know. There's been a lot of questions about compensatory services. You know, if kids are regressing because they're not getting all the services. Can you change the slide, please, Joanne, while I'm talking? Thank you. If kids are regressing and they're not getting all the services that are required in the IEP, there may be kids who need additional services going forward or compensatory services. It's going to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. The state and federal government likely as well will be developing more guidance so that we'll know better how to approach this when schools reopen. But I guess there's two things to know now. First, it's obviously best to get as many services as possible now. And secondly, it's very important, and we're going to talk about this in the next slide, Joanne, to document as much as you can what your school district is providing and how your child is doing. So the bottom line of what you can do now is contact your school district, whatever level of the process you are with your school district. Tell them what you're most concerned about for your child. If there's needs that aren't being met that you feel are most urgent, to make that really clear and explain it. We have a sample email message that you can use to request the remote learning plan at this link here. We're hoping to be developing more materials over time that will assist parents. And the second thing, as we talked about, is to document what the school is doing and how your child's doing, not just for future compensatory services, but to help improve the services your child gets now. So whether parents use a handwritten journal or something on the computer, or there's some forms available from different advocacy groups like the Federation for Children with Special Needs, Some families have talked about taking videos, short video clips, so they can really help the school district to see how their child is struggling. Our office is hoping to roll out, maybe as soon as next week, a phone app that will hopefully make it easier for families to just keep track of what services are being provided by the district, and some quick notes about how your child is doing. But that's going to be important, not just for the future, but to hopefully help the school district provide what's needed now while these schools are closed. And I think that's it, and we're ready to open up for questions, and the next pages are resources for you as well. So a little longer than 15, but sorry. We'll go for questions.
All right, thank you, Julia. We got a lot of really great questions in the question box. Let's get started. So first question, are speech therapists mandated to provide related services to students? They're saying that they cannot do telehealth.
That is what speech therapists were, originally that was true. And Joanne, can you switch to the autism resources that are around communication so I can just show that while I'm talking? Other direction. Anyway, you'll see the resources around communication. We have the site where the state licensure board for speech therapists changed their rules so that speech therapists can begin to provide teletherapy now. They changed the rule that says before, speech therapists were hesitant because they were not allowed to, according to their licensure board, unless they had 10 hours of training about how to do teletherapy. They changed the rules because of COVID to say that speech therapists can start now, and then they have 4 months to do that training. And secondly, the rules had said that speech therapists could only provide teletherapy if they first evaluate the child in person, which obviously is impossible. And so they've relaxed that rule. These rules are relaxed only during the COVID period of the emergency order. So schools, again, school districts have different capacities, but speech therapists can and should be providing speech therapy is what we've been told with these changes. It's a good question.
Please keep submitting your questions in the question box. Our next question, regarding kids turning 3 who are losing their EI services, can DPH allow services to continue with EI until school is back in session?
Another great question. There will be more guidance coming from the state on that. I think that there's several possibilities there. I think a school district could choose to use the EI evaluations to determine that the child is eligible for special ed services at age 3. And it is allowed to then implement the IEP of a 3-year-old through the DPH early intervention services. But the school district, for that to work, would have to agree to be paying for the services to DPH. So there's a lot of advocacy at the state level to figure out how to make it not kid by kid, that this all has to be worked out, but that there might be a smoother transition, since there's no transition right now. It's a very acute need. I think there are legal handles now, and we're hoping there's going to be better legal solutions in the future. I guess that's the short version. But if you're a parent who has a child in that situation, please call our helpline, or feel free to call our helpline.
Another great question. If your child cannot handle the stimulus of group online classes, is the district required to offer one-on-one Zoom?
I think that again, there's no clear cut, there's no case law. We've never had a situation like this. I think what is clear is that if the child is not able to engage in the Zoom classroom experience, then our suggestion would be that the parent let the school district know that, let them know that in writing. If you have a suggestion of what would work, if it's one-to-one, or if there's some way, we just talked with somebody who had said that there was a child who was not engaging, and then they worked out some strategies, getting a different service provider who the child was very familiar with on the Zoom at the same time to help the child feel more comfortable. So I think what's clear is that they have to make accommodations so that your child can access the services that are being offered. There may be a range of options. One-to-one might be one of them that would make that doable, and it's very reasonable and appropriate and important to ask for that. But again, the collaboration and the brainstorming of how to make it work is going to really take very effective communication. And again, if that's the situation, you can call our helpline to go into more detail.
We have a lot of questions around this sort of theme. If you've already talked to the teacher, a mediator, the team, the school, the district, where can you go? Who can you talk to?
You can call our helpline. You can contact the Department of Ed. You could file a complaint with PRS, but our suggestion before doing something like that would, I mean, if you've exhausted everything, there may not be anywhere to go, but there may be other options creatively to try to work out something locally before you do that. And we'd be happy to, you know, if it's helpful to talk to somebody on the helpline to kind of think that through. So you do have available options, but the most expedient way in most cases is going to be to try to work it out locally.
I also have a few questions about whether you know anything about when schools will reopen, or if there are any conversations about extending the academic school year into the summer.
No crystal ball. I wish I did. There are a lot of conversations about all those things. And, you know, part of what is so hard for us as adults, we can only imagine what it's like for kids and for kids with autism, is living in this time of uncertainty. I don't think the governor or the commissioner of education have a clear-cut answer to that, but I think everything's on the table right now.
Okay. And sort of related, if schools are canceled until the end of the year, what does that mean for year-round day programs?
If schools are canceled for all year and you're in a day program that goes through the summer that has an extended school year, then those extended school year services, in our view, would need to be provided remotely in the same way the 180-day school year days need to be provided remotely. And if, God forbid, we're still closed over the summer, hopefully all the practitioners and all the folks in Massachusetts and around the country who are trying to figure out effective ways to teach kids with autism remotely will have more robust services by then. And then the same thing will hold in terms of documenting being provided and really trying to be have as much information you can about what's working and not working to make it better the longer it goes, and to also address any future needs.
A few transition questions. What do you do if your child is turning 22 in June? Part of the transition is leaving the actual school, and that can't be replicated while at home. Do you think DOE will have an overall ruling, or will each school system handle it differently?
I think that DESE was likely to give guidance around the turning 22 issues, and I know that they have said publicly to all the special ed directors that for students turning 22 who are going to state a DDS or other state agency services, they do have a process for considering on a kid-by-kid basis if it makes sense for them to remain receiving special ed services and delaying the transition to the human service agency. There's no, they haven't given more information about what the process is. So again, I wish there was more absolute clear-cut answers to all these things, but if those issues are of concern for you with your child who's turning 22, those are important things to communicate with the district and to maybe approach the state too if you want to explore that option for your child. And again, if you have more questions than we have time for now, feel free to call our helpline.
Do a couple more questions. One person is wondering if in the longer run we can advocate for the transition kids to give them a little more time for transition. Could the state fund this through the schools?
I think a lot of things are being considered at the state level. I think there may be some things that are decided systemically for all kids, and some things are gonna, if you feel like your child needs additional time or some time to compensate for what they've lost, those are going to be, those kind of case-by-case decisions are going to need to be made, which is why all this keeping information documentation is going to be so important. So some of this may be resolved with state guidance, but always it's going to be kid by kid, no matter what the state says.
All right. My son should be transmitted to middle school, but we rejected the placement. We canceled our school meeting in March. Should the IEP team schedule the virtual meeting before summer?
If it was a client we were working with, or my own child, if I were a parent, I would absolutely request that meeting and make it clear that it's very important because of the situation. The state has said to districts that they believe that since they may have a limited capacity to convene team meetings, that they should probably prioritize those kinds of situations where a child is facing some kind of change in placement or potential change in placement that should be resolved before the school year starts or reopens. And it may be less pressing for some kids who are having their regularly scheduled annual IEP meeting. Those parents may not be as eager to have a virtual meeting.
Are we supposed to receive an official remote learning plan? My district is just winging it, it seems like, and scheduling ad hoc.
I'm sorry, answer me. I just read a comment that just reiterates that the state is very much working on clarification on early intervention timelines and the transition timeline. So I think it's very clear that we will get some further guidance soon. Can you repeat that question? I can't multitask, obviously.
Are we supposed to receive an official remote learning plan? My district seems to just be winging it.
Yes, you should be. The state's been very clear about it. The state was also very clear that they knew that it was going to take time for districts to roll it out and develop it. Again, some districts have been doing this before it was this became something the state was guiding them to do. Others have been scrambling over the last 2 weeks to do it. Some, from what we hear from parents, have not been responding. So we understand, I think we all understand the constraints that the school districts and the educators and the service providers are under. They are absolutely working their tails off. And at the same time, if you have not received the plan, it's completely appropriate to use that sample email we sent and to request it from your district. And if you don't get a response, again, feel free to call our helpline. And we've already heard from some families who've used that, Joanne was just telling me, and that did help them to get the remote learning plan sooner than later. Doesn't mean it will always help, but it's a tool.
Okay. And one more question. If they have to address current IEP goals, does that mean our IEP is in full force? In other words, does the district have to accommodate the service grid?
The district has to work from the service grid, and they have to be doing everything they can to provide the services that are on the service grid. But for many kids, it's not going to be possible because the schools are closed to provide the same level and frequency of services, which is why we're living in this because of the emergency situation. It's a different era. And so I think for you as a parent, our advice would be to push for whatever needs of your child you think are not being met, and you can work from the IEP, and hopefully more services will be being provided over time. And as we said, to the extent you've got the time and resources with how stretched all the parents are, keep track of how your kid is doing with the level of services they're getting. We do hope and expect that districts will be responsive as they hear from parents through the journaling they're doing or through the videos they show how kids are struggling more than the school might realize. That may help them to creatively figure out how to better meet your kids' needs.
Okay, I'm trying to fit all these in.
You're doing great, Lilia.
I know you all have a lot of questions, so this is good. We've got Julia here. Take advantage of it. Can the district request an IEP meeting to change the IEP in mid-year because they want to take out services?
They can. And it is the parent's choice about whether or not they want to, if they'll want to convene an IEP meeting remotely. So if you as a parent are not comfortable convening the IEP meeting remotely, then you can wait until the schools reopen, is my understanding.
Do we have any more questions?
So please, if you do have further questions, please or questions that are more based on your own individual child's needs, please feel free to contact our helpline. Please let us know through comments or by contacting Lilia what subjects you would feel are most salient for you to learn about in terms of how to meet this incredibly challenging time, how to meet the needs of children with autism of all ages, 3 to 22, remotely when this has never been done before. And you as parents are required to take on so much more of the education to make it work effectively. These are challenging times. We thank you so much for taking the time out of such very busy days and nights. Every day feels like a year, I think, to many people. So thank you. I hope this is helpful, and please stay in touch with any other ways you think we can assist you in getting the services that kids with autism need in this very challenging time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. You'll all be receiving an email either tomorrow or early next week with the slides from today and some other resources that we have on our website. So stay tuned for that.
So I'm going to say we're going to keep the chat open for a minute. If you have any suggestions for future meetings, please type them in.
Yep. Joy, did you talk about next week's meeting?
Oh my goodness, I didn't. I was, so what, for those that are here, I did. Dr. Russo and Dr. Stephanie Monahan from NESCA will be focusing on how to address anxiety issues for kids through remote instruction and services.
Yeah, so if there's any other topics you'd like us to address, please let us know.
Great.
Thank you. Transition. Yes, it seems like a lot of people are interested in transition stuff. I don't know if you're seeing these. We had a lot of questions about that today.
Great. All righty. And do they have the email if folks want to email you later about other topics?
Yeah, so that's communications@massadvocates.org, and I put that in the chat box as well.
Great. All right. So should we say good night?
Good night.
Thank you all. Thanks for all you're doing.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.